Open us with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara ki tai. E hia ki ane te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei mauri ora. Kia ora tātou, e hara ahau i te tangata mōhio ki te kōrero otira, e tika ana, kia mihi atu, kia mihi mai. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki te atua, he mihi mahana ki te ariki nui, ara te kuini Māori, nā waihono i te pōpaki. Kia papatu ana ku te whaia, tēnā koe, kia rangi nui te matua, tēnā koe. Ki nā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Ki nā tini atua, haere, haere, whakanaro atu rā. Hoki mai ki a tātou nā kanohi ora, nō reira he mihi mahana ki a koutou i nā rangatira, ka mihi ki nā iwi kāinga, kia nā te rangi nui, ko nā te pukenga, ko nai te rangi. Ka mihi hukhuki ki ngā hoa mahi i te whenua katoa, kia korua o kukai kōrero, Ruby, rawa ko Akuhata, tēnā korua, he mihi nui, he mihi aroha. Ko waiau, ko puki o raka, ko whangatawatia nā maunga, ko waihau, ko wairoa nā awa, ko tika pamuana, ko karirikura nā moana, ko tainui, ko tīna nana waka. Ko Ngāti Maru, ko te raroa nā iwi, ko Ngāti Rautau, ko Ngāti Waiora nā hapu, ko Matai Whitu, ko Roma nā marae, ko Shari Gallup, aho. Ka huri ki Bryony.
Ngā mihi, Shari. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko te rana te whakapaparanga mai. Engari, ko o te poti whenua tupu, ko ka Mātauranga te kāinga. He waihopai o e noho ana, ko Bryony Miller, ahau. Tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to everyone joining us online today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our webinar, Whakarongo ki te Taiao. We've been Mātauranga Māori into climate adaptation. Very briefly, for those not familiar with the Aotearoa or New Zealand Coastal Society, we are a technical group of Engineering New Zealand. However, the multidisciplinary nature of coastal management in Aotearoa means our members represent a wide range of coastal science, engineering, management, ecological and planning disciplines. We believe it is critical to combine our expertise, working together to apply our knowledge for the best outcomes of Taiao. Our mission and vision as a society is to take a leading role in facilitating discussions and interactions across Aotearoa to better manage and learn about our coastal and marine environment. Further to this, aiming to ensure sustainable management of Aotearoa's takutai and moana Taiao is underpinned by sound science, engineering policy, comprehensive monitoring, involved communities and effective national networks. Te Komiti Māori was initiated in 2023 by Shari and myself to enhance and cherish Te Ao Māori within NZCS and our activities and resources. We want to focus on Māori ways of being, doing and knowing and ensure this is valued in our society in an inclusive and meaningful manner. One aspect of this includes supporting our Māori coastal scientists and students and their mahi, leading us to today's webinar, Whakarongo ki te Taiao, weaving Mātauranga Māori into climate adaptation. So very briefly, and then we can get started, a couple of housekeeping items. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. You can submit your questions here at any time during the presentations, and we'll collate them all at the end and then spark up a conversation with our speakers. Questions are open for all attendees to view, so we encourage you to use the upvote function on any question that you might also be curious about. This webinar has been recorded and will be shared in the very near future and on the NZCS website. We'll also put a link in the chat for membership if people want to join NZCS, which we hope you do, and there is a free community option to join the mailing list if you wish as well. So that's all from me. Ngā mihi, ka huri ki Shari.
Kia ora, Bryony. So today we've got two awesome speakers that we're really excited about. So the first one is Dr. Akuhata Bailey-Winiata, who I've worked with very closely for quite a number of years now, and we've been on quite a journey that's not over yet. It's going to be followed by Ruby Mckenzie-Sheat from Te Kuava New Earth Sciences New Zealand. So we're going to start off with Aku. He can introduce himself and give his kōrero. That will be followed by Ruby. As you think of them, there's a Q&A down the bottom, as Bryony mentioned, so feel free to populate those as we go, and then we'll focus on the questions at the end. So please kick off, Dr. Bailey-Winiata.
Kia ora, Shari. Kia ora, Bryony. I'm just gonna share my screen. Ooh, I need to present it. Sorry, we had the same issue before, and I thought I knew what I was doing, but now I've realized I didn't. Okay, I assume you can all see that now. Here's hoping. So kia ora whānau, ko Akuhata Bailey-Winiata tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no tūharanga me ngā te whakaue, me ngā te tute tawha, no rotura ahau. So kia ora, I'm Akuhata. I work for Petal Delamore Partners, PDP, which is an environmental consultancy, sorry. So yeah, I've got a varied background. So from Rotorua, studied in Hamilton, moved to Tauranga, and now I'm still in Tauranga working for PDP. So giving a bit of a background to my kōrero today, Te Māori and climate adaptation, what's happening and what's possible. I kind of want to give an overview of the mahi I've been up to and where it's headed. A bit about me, it was kind of highlighted to us that this would be a great opportunity to talk more personally about us and our journeys as Māori, coastal scientists, researchers, in this space. And we kind of got asked to impart a wise piece of wisdom or advice to others who are kind of at that start of their journeys as well. I often try to avoid giving advice because I feel like I'm still learning, but I have a few things that I've learned along the way. Here are just some pictures of some of the opportunities. So there's me and my mum and my dad. So I was the first to graduate, graduate university, which I'm sure many people here can resonate with. Throughout my studies and my research and my practice, I've been able to travel. So going to the US, going to Japan, traveling around Aotearoa, New Zealand, our beautiful country. There's been so many opportunities that I've said yes to, and I've ended up in some interesting places. Another cool opportunity was meeting, this is Fire Sarah from Chile. She's an indigenous Mapuche academic at the University de la Frontera. I went there as a delegation from New Zealand to Chile around climate change and climate change adaptation and creating those connections between Aotearoa and Chile. So I guess the biggest piece of advice and word of wisdom that I would give is take every opportunity that comes your way because you never know where you're going to end up. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun over my couple of years doing research and practice. So yeah. Okay, getting into the kōrero now. My thinking about Te Ao Māori and adaptation, and I wanted to start off this presentation with really giving my perspective of what Te Ao Māori and adaptation means to me. I think it's quite important to highlight that Te Ao Māori is quite diverse. My worldview is different to Shari, Bryony, and Ruby's worldviews. I think it's important that we position our work in that at the very beginning. So here is just a collation of some images of how I view Te Ao Māori and adaptation. So for me, I see the historical perspective, our tūpuna, our lessons from the past, as being integral to how we proceed further with climate change, natural hazards, adaptation. A bit of the work which I'll talk about later on in this presentation, we looked at the relocation process following the 1886 Tarawera eruption, which my whānau tūharangi as well as Ngāti Rangitihi relocated following that event. So really identifying those lessons of the past is really integral to how I view adaptation. The old-timey image at the bottom here, that's a photo of some of my whanaunga. So the baby in the picture is my great-great-uncle. And some of these people were part of the relocation process following the Tarawera eruption or related to. And I think this just shows the importance of looking to the whakapapa. I always kind of knew that we went through that process. However, I didn't really come to realize it until I was doing my studies during my PhD in adaptation. So it's quite funny and quite ironic, I guess, how that cycle of whakapapa works. You know, there's always a reason to why you do what you do. And I think that's a big part of mine. Moving more to contemporary, I wanted to share another example from my own whakapapa. So in 2016, we moved my great-grandfather, so the twin brother of this baby here. He was in an urupa well, he died in the 1980s. At that time, we didn't have an urupa as a whānau, a burial ground. So he got buried in another whānau urupa. There were some events that happened and we could no longer go bury our whānau alongside him. So there was a call by his wife, my great-great-grandmother, to move him to our new whānau urupa that we had. So we did that. This photo here, I was a bit cautious about putting this photo because I wasn't quite sure, but that was him, his remains in a coffin, and my great-grandmother wanted all of his mokopuna, mokotuarua, mokotua toru to be able to draw and write on his coffin. So as you can see, this is in the back of my nanny's ute on my great-grandmother's front lawn, and all of us were drawing on our great-great-koro's coffin, which I think was pretty cool. But this just shows how relocation and adaptation is within my whakapapa, within my experience, and I feel really humbled to be able to support other people who are going through that process moving forward. Now getting into a bit of the mahi I've been up to, so looking backwards, like I mentioned, is really important to me. So a piece of work we did as part of my PhD, we looked backwards to the historical relocations of Māori communities. So the map on your left shows 51 examples of where Māori communities have relocated or have discussed relocation in response to natural hazards. As you can see, there's a variety of natural hazards, tsunami, flooding, erosion, etc. The key point to this piece of work is that it highlighted to us that relocation wasn't a foreign concept. Now, throughout my studies and throughout my research, I've encountered hesitance to the idea of relocation as something that we haven't done as Māori or haven't done as Māori communities before. However, there are numerous examples of where this is, and we all know this. We all know that we have relocation and we've had adaptation in our whakapapa, but sometimes we forget it. So this was an opportunity to bring that forward, bring those lessons of the past, understand how we move forward. So from that national scale, we dug deeper into a case study with my own iwi tūharangi following the Tarawera eruption of 1886. I got to interview some of my whānau who held that mātauranga, that knowledge following the event. It was such a diverse array of kōrero from my kaumātua, from my aunties, from my uncles, that it was really unique. Some things that I found quite interesting from that piece of research was the idea around tohu, or signs or signals within the environment. So there was the earthquakes that were occurring before the eruption took place, and there was discussion around not putting Ruaumoko, the god of earthquakes, to sleep properly, so not paying him that level of respect, perhaps. Other events such as the ghost walker that Te Paia and some other people, Te Paia was a guide, that they saw on the lake, was a tohu for something to come. And something that helped to contextualize the historical process moving forward in the future of climate change was the idea around koha, or manaakitanga, that reciprocity, that giving of resources, whatever it may be. And there was a discussion around how we know that if something like that were to happen again in the future, that same level of offering of kai, of koha, of land to move to, will be reciprocated again into the future. So that was quite a neat piece to look backwards. Now, what's happening on the ground? So as I mentioned, I work for Paddle Delamore Partners, and I just recently completed my PhD, where a large focus of that was working with Māori communities who are going through this as we speak. So here's a collation of some images, trying to understand climate change, risk, and adaptation for Māori communities. Shari appears in two of those photos. So the top left one, oops, sorry, go back. The top left one was on our way to an island within Tauranga Harbour, where we went to learn the issues facing this hapu here. This is one of their cliffs that they were most concerned about. Here they've got coastal erosion issues, unearthing of kōiwi, or human remains. This image here shows some flood mapping that we did for another hapu within Tauranga. As you can see, their community is like around here. They've got the river coming from this side. as well as the estuary from the other side. So they're coastally sandwiched in between. So they're facing issues around river flooding as well as coastal flooding. The importance of sharing these examples is to show that this is happening now. It's not something in the future that we're going to have to contend with. Communities, both Māori and non-Māori right now, are facing the impacts of natural hazards and climate change, and are having to go through the process of planning for adaptation and what that looks like. So I think this is just good to bring to the forefront and keep front and center with our mahi. Again, I like to kind of start big and go down. So I wanted to share some case studies of 2 Māori communities that we've worked with, and we recently published a paper alongside them, which we published in the recent special issue for the New Zealand Coastal Society. I'll be happy to send a link to that in future communications, because it was a really neat opportunity to partner the science and the risk assessment with the lessons learned and the experiences of those on the ground. It was a nice kind of marriage there. So we got to showcase 2 Māori communities, so Ngai Tamawhariua at Te Rere Kahia Marae, so that's the coastally sandwiched example I mentioned. They experienced flooding during Gabriel. Their marae is set back on higher ground, however they have a low-lying papakainga as well as an urupa on an island. The other case study was of Maketu. So there's the Maketu Iwi Collective. So this is a low-lying coastal community of Maketu. Whakaue marae is less than 10 meters from the estuary edge. So they've got issues around erosion and flooding, potentially with climate change. And a lot of whānau live in those low-lying areas, as well as they have quite high cliffs on parts of their coast, which have experienced erosion in the recent past. So we dug a bit deeper. The important bit of this is to showcase the learnings. And I think this was a great mutual opportunity that our co-authors were on board with, was being able to share lessons for other communities, other hapu who are going through that same process or embarking on their journey with adaptation. And I think that's really important to collectively share learnings and understandings and maybe what we could have done differently or what we wish we would have done. Just to share that collective knowledge is really important, because adaptation can be quite scary. It's quite uncertain. So having some examples to learn from is really helpful. I'll stop talking, but this one, it was really good. So Ngai Tamawhariua, they shared around getting the tamariki and rangatihi on board because the future is theirs. They also mentioned how we need to identify ways that the current generation, what can they do in order for the foundations to be laid for future generations to build from. So really showing the intergenerational aspect that's required for that adaptation planning. Another thing that was really interesting and I found really inspiring with this example is they mention around doing a stock take. Not a stock take of data, but a stock take of who's who. Like within the hapu, do we have some lawyers, or do we have environmental planners, or do we have people who have connections with the council? What is the internal capacity and capability of our whānau who can support the adaptation planning? I think was really unique and quite a great kind of step that you can do to help inform your adaptation plan. Yeah. Now moving to the Maketu example. So here's some images there. This example really highlighted the need for autonomy and self-determination with adaptation planning. So ensuring that the community leads that process, both in terms of how you go about it, be it through wānanga, engagement, developing a plan, bringing in rangatahi. It's really that self-determination that is important to that adaptation planning. Leading the conversations, advising the priorities, again, honing in on that self-determination for adaptation. And something that's really important and we're trying to get better at is implementation. So, you know, we have so many adaptation plans at the moment, and we're on a recent MB endeavour which was successful to identify those pathways to bridge that implementation gap. But it's hard, and they noted that, you know, it's easy to develop a plan, however, actually implementing that plan is a challenge. They've identified pathways to move forward, which is really promising, and I'm quite excited to see where they go with that. Moving forwards, so I just wanted to share some lessons from these examples and identify opportunities that we're actively moving forward and seeking in this space. So as you can see, the spiral here was kind of key themes of some of the kōrero that was shared by the two communities. So the importance of co-development, importance of connections, intergenerational thinking, Mātauranga or Indigenous knowledges, tino rangatiratanga, self-determination, sovereignty, rangatiratanga, leadership, etc. Those are all important from those two communities' perspectives to adaptation planning. Again, sharing that empowering perspective is really important. There was a call, and this is a call from not only this piece of mahi, but some other mahi that I've been part of. There's a call for providing resource and opportunity to go through mamae and intergenerational trauma with adaptation. And this is specifically mentioned when discussions around managed retreat relocation come to the forefront. We need to provide avenues and ways to acknowledge and address that mamae. And if it's not, adaptation is going to be a struggle moving forward. So we need to actively identify ways that we can do that. I don't have all the answers, but it's something that needs to be part of that planning process. A lot of the mahi that we've done has concluded to these three key messages for three key audiences. So importance of rangatiratanga for tangata whenua, to lead, advise those priorities, advise and conduct those discussions and ensure that future generations are represented as well as protected. The key message for government is ensuring that fit for purpose policy and guidance that's centered in Te Ao Māori, Mātauranga Māori, and builds that capability and capacity of whānau. And for us as researchers and practitioners, fostering those partnerships with hapu and iwi and finding ways that we can build their capacity and capability as well to be able to do this type of mahi more is really important. Kind of some more broader lessons moving forward, a need for a Te Tiriti-centric approach to climate adaptation. That's a big discussion at the moment. So like the framework that's being developed as part of MFE, there's a call to have Te Tiriti as part of that planning. Equitable funding models that are long-term. So there's a lot of short-term funding out there that is really good at providing a mechanism to get things started, so seed funding, to get the risk assessment going, to start the adaptation planning. However, we also need some funding models that are long-term and can also address the implementation. So how can we keep the ball rolling, so to speak? And I think important overall to the mahi that I've been up to and the mahi that was shared by those two examples was the need for enhancing the capability and capacity of whānau to be able to do this. I think we need to empower our communities to be able to adapt, to be able to plan for the future with changing climate, with changing natural hazards. I think it's really important and really crucial that whatever we do, we ensure that that is happening. And again, it doesn't have to be like a huge thing. It could be going to wānanga or inviting hapu members to certain things. It doesn't have to be on the grand scale. It can be small things that are incremental to that longer term change. So it's all from me. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, please flick them to the Q&A, which I can see there's a few. So I'll get my thinking caps on to some of those. But yes, thank you for your time today. And thank you to the Coastal Society for providing this platform for myself and Ruby today. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Akuhata. Awesome as always. So next up we have Ruby. I'm really looking forward to hearing Ruby's kōrero. We met last year at the Coastal Society conference, I think it was. Had some good chats over your poster, so really keen to hear a bit more about that today. You take it away, Ruby.
Cool, tēnā koe Shari, and ka mihi Akuhata for your presentation. It was really cool to hear a bit about your mahi. Also figuring out the share screen option again. But should be good to go. So yeah, this is a bit of a deeper dive into a case study that I've been working on, but before we get into the mahi, koeo, huri tēnei no kaitahu kāti māmoe me waitaha ko te rau aroha te marae, ko wharetutu te tipuna, ko Ruby Mckenzie-Sheat tōku ingoa. So I whakapapa back to Awaruadana Bluff, but I grew up in Waikagu Beach in North Canterbury. And being right by the beach, I got to see how quickly our coastlines can change, going from, I guess, the standard dunes to the like really big steep cliffs after a storm, which I think helped kind of nudge me towards wanting to learn more about geography and coastal hazards. I ended up doing a Master of Disaster Risk and Resilience at UC, and then went through the Māori Graduate Internship Program at NIWA, where I got to learn about all the different research fields that NIWA has to offer, and included going and working on a boat in the middle of the ocean for a couple of weeks. I'm now in my second year of working in Te Kuaha, which is the Māori research team at NIWA, although we're now Earth Sciences New Zealand. So yeah, again, with a little piece of advice, I think would just be do what interests you. Like I didn't grow up knowing that I wanted to work in science, I guess, but just, yeah, followed what I was interested in, and now I'm here. So thanks for listening. So this project emerged through an ongoing relationship with Te Runanga Arangitāne o Waido up in Blenheim, as whānau were wanting to build more on previous research around tsunami and purako. It's centered around Te Pokohiwi o Kupe, or the Waido Bar, which is a site that holds unique cultural and archaeological history. Rangitane know it as the birthplace of Aotearoa, and alongside archaeologists have found things such as middens, tools, koiwi, and have been able to date these back to the early 1300s. Current research has shown that at present, in a 100-year flood event, 20% of the heritage area of the Waido Bar, which is shown in green, is exposed to inundation, which could mean those burial grounds, taonga, and other archaeological material is damaged or washed away. And then with 0.5 metre of sea level rise, this increases to 54%, and then up to 75% with a 1 metre rise in sea level. The risk of losing Māori taonga and history isn't unique to Te Pokohiwi or Kupe alone. As we heard from Akuhata, there are many coastal areas throughout Aotearoa at risk from climate-driven inundation and erosion, and the extent of what could be lost isn't necessarily known. So this project aims to co-develop an adaptable and transferable framework to better quantify the risks and impacts to taonga and whenua in a way that is grounded in a Te Ao Māori lens, specifically seeing if we can use Riskscape to run consequence functions informed by Mātauranga to then assess the impacts of inundation in a more holistic way. So basically Riskscape is a flexible multi-hazard impact modelling tool that integrates geospatial hazard with exposure data and vulnerability functions to estimate the damage and losses for different hazard scenarios. In February last year, we had a full team huia kanohi at Ukaipo, Rangitane's Cultural Centre in Blenheim, to set the foundations for this research to go ahead. And an initial step that came from that hui was establishing a Mātauranga Māori plan to ensure that any knowledge shared by Rangitane would be protected. And we've broken up the research program into 2 sections, starting from July last year as Wahanga Tuatahi, so year 1, and then Wahanga Tuarua, or year 2, which is what we're working on at the moment. So we worked with Rangitane to design a kōtuku framework to help to depict the 2 stages. inspired by the kōtuku represented in their logo, embodying the Mātauranga-led approach for this research, as well as the connection to natural taonga within Te Māori. So starting at the upoko, this covers the research in wahanga tuatahi, so the first year of this project. And mahi has been outlined in 2 streams, so the social and the technical, to show the different disciplines or approaches, but both streams feed into and inform each other and are undertaken alongside rangitane whānau with continual guidance and input and validation. So starting off on the technical science side, we worked with rangitane to digitise any areas they wanted included in the risk assessment. So for example, wahitapu, urupa, buildings, assets, those kind of things. And through this process, rangitane were able to disclose as much or as little about the areas they defined, as they're just shown as the highlighted polygons. So this meant they could protect any mātauranga that didn't need to be shared, while still having a focus on the areas of importance. And then in parallel to this, we were modelling a range of inundation scenarios, so different levels of flooding at different increments of sea level rise, as well as a tsunami model. And then the hazard layers were overlaid with the taonga exposure data and riskscape to run a benchmark exposure analysis. So it's that kind of first chunk in that riskscape workflow. And then as well as the taonga and hazard mapping, we also wanted to try and get a picture of where taonga and archaeological material might be within the bar. So this was done using GPR or ground penetrating radar over previous archaeological survey locations on the Wairoa Bar. It was an exploratory task, testing to see how well it performed in identifying archaeological taonga. The processing of the aerial GPR is still ongoing, but the GPR team have developed 2-dimensional profiles from the ground-based GPR. So the grey figure down the bottom translates to the white line on the right-hand side picture with those like tightly spaced pink grid lines. And then from those tightly spaced grid lines, they've then been interpolated into a 3D cube. And then from this, the GPR team have been able to create JS maps, so that middle image there, to try and identify features within the survey area. So for example, the darker areas are due to stronger signals. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but they're so yeah, darker signals, darker areas, stronger signals indicate features like buried soil surfaces, hangi pits, or other taonga. And then, as it was done over previous survey locations, we know that the dark area, I'm hoping you can see my mouse, if not, it's kind of by the coast in the red box. We know they are hangi pits due to the other surveys that have been done. We don't know what the other darker areas are. It's something the GPR team are still working on to be able to evaluate those mapped outputs. But it helps build that picture of where things could be within the bar. And then leaning more towards the social science side of the project, in July of last year, we travelled to Blenheim for a week of interviews with rangitane whānau. Key experts were identified by rangitane, and then we held interviews in kind of a semi-structured format. So we had some questions outlined beforehand to try and shape kōrero, but also allowed space for those conversations to just flow naturally, as we were just wanting to hear about the first-hand experiences whānau had living and growing up along the Wairoa River. So some came by themselves, others came with whānau, just whatever was most comfortable. The kōrero were very rich and quite varied. So whānau talked about how they remembered flooding as kids, mahinga kai, rongoa, pūrākau, but they all had a strong sense of responsibility to place and upholding the mana and history associated with Te Pokohiwi o Kupe, as well as the wider area. And then kōrero were recorded in a summary document under 5 main themes, which emerged when analysing all the transcripts, which was then sent back to rangitane and each of those who were interviewed for the document to be reviewed and then validated. So those 5 themes then help to inform the 4 impact categories, which is shown on the right-hand side there. And these will be used to start testing out the consequence functions to be developed for the risk-ape workflow at the top. And then they'll be run alongside the benchmark exposure analysis from the taonga and hazard mapping. We also held a hui in June of this year up in Blenheim with rangitane whānui sharing kind of the whole of the progress to date and to hear any feedback that they had to go over and to go over the next steps. And it's kind of in the next steps where those 2 streams, the social and the technical, start being woven together. And it's pretty much the halfway point of this project as we're now progressing into wahanga tuarua. So for now and in the coming year, we're working on refining and validating those consequence functions and implementing them into risk-ape workflows to produce informative coastal risk assessments. And then these will be used to inform conversations with rangitane whānui about potential mitigation options. And we'll also be co-facilitating hui alongside rangitane with the wider, across the wider Te Tau Ihu with communities and different agencies, looking at the potential for wider application and uptake of the outputs, information to support adaptation decision making. We're also presenting on this kaupapa at a couple of upcoming conferences, so the Coastal Society in November and the Adaptation Futures Conference in November, so that's the last talk listed here on the Wednesday, and Akuhata is also presenting on the Tuesday, so if you want to come along and listen to those talks, that'd be great. But yeah, that is all from me. Ngā mihi nui. Yeah, kini pātai.
Ngā mihi, Ruby, and Akuhata as well. Mahi tika ana, really insightful, interesting presentations. And also stoked to see some questions coming through. So I'll have a read through of these now and direct them to you. First of all, there's a few for you, Akuhata, following on from your presentation. And then Ruby, there'll be a couple for you too. So first of all, kia ora Liana. Thanks for jumping on. Says, tēnā pai te rangahau. Not sure if you were able to, Akuhata, but did you model what the proposed port extension might do to flooding in the harbour? If not, what's your view on this?
Kia ora, Liana. Thank you for that question. So for that specific example, we only looked at river flooding. So we didn't look at the impacts of the port. However, working off a lot of hapu within Tauranga Moana at the moment, and the port extension is front and center of a lot of people's minds, a lot of hapu minds. So I think there's a discussion to be had around that, particularly around what the climate impacts are going to be moving forward, but I haven't looked into that yet, but definitely a room for discussion on that point, definitely.
Good, Akuhata. Isabella says, Rawe. Well done. Great
Kia ora.
job. Coriana, I hope I said that right. Great name. Kia ora, Akuhata. In terms of implementation, any tips on how best to implement adaptation plans for climate resilience in more rural, remote areas?
Yeah, that question really threw me when I was looking through the Q&A, because I was thinking, I haven't really had experience with rural communities. I've worked with smaller Māori communities along the coast of the Bay of Plenty, and something I guess I've learned from that process is to ensure that it starts at the community level. So ensuring that it is led by the community, I think is really important, because then there's a level of ownership with the planning and with the wānanga or whatever's done as part of that process. I think that's really important, especially within those small, tight-knit communities. I think it's really important to have them lead the process. So yeah, I haven't really had too much experience, but from the limited experience, that's what I would kind of say would help to initiate and implement those plans, is to ensure that it's always started with them at the beginning. But I do know resourcing is a huge issue. So identifying opportunities in that regard will also be quite important to be able to do it. So yeah, thank you for your question, Koriana.
Well, that's an interesting point as well, and it was actually one of my questions too, in terms of who is leading the implementation. You know, is this really sort of hapu iwi leading this, or a council's jumping on board? Is it kind of a combined, I guess, you know, being more rural remote, you still have a council there to
yes
be in touch with, but
and councils are, at the moment, councils are kind of the leaders in terms of implementing a lot of adaptation. So there's that discussion there too, like you bring up, Bryony, around bringing the council on board as well is going to be really important. I know with some of the adaptation mahi I've been privileged to be part of, particularly with hapu, having those relationships with council is really important. Identifying those opportunities and pathways moving forward to implement alongside council is really beneficial. So if that is an opportunity, or if that's a possibility, then that's something that you could potentially explore.
Yeah, kia ora. And hopefully that helped, Koriana, but feel free to you know, be in touch as well if there's anything further in that space. All right, one more for you, Akuhata, then I'll let you off the hook for a little while. In the Makatū examples, right, this is from Cornell. What is engagement like with the whānau there? Are you going in when consensus is reached by them that they need an adaptation plan, or is this sort of a before-after approach?
Yeah. Kia ora, Cornell. Thank you for your message and question. I guess important with those two examples, and particularly the Makatū one, is that they were all community-led, and we basically, at that time, we were doing some analysis of national coastal marae exposure to sea level rise, and I knew that they were doing really cool mahi, and I saw so many lessons that they could provide for other hapu that are going through that same process. So I approached them with an opportunity to share those examples. So that project was merely learning from their examples, and I'm sure the Makatū community could answer that specific question. However, speaking from experience, looking more detailed in terms of that, I think it's quite iterative in terms of how it's approached, and often they're based on relationships that are built up over several years. So we're working with a hapu here in Tauranga, where I had a coffee with him, gosh, would have been like 4 years ago. At that time, you know, the hapu went in a place that had other kaupapa that they were focusing on, and coastal change and climate change wasn't really top and center for them. However, in the past year, they've gotten back in touch, and we're like, hey, this is now on our priority list. We're super keen to sort of find ways to work together. So that's kind of an example. But yeah, in that example, we're coming in quite early stages to assist with that early wānanga, or to build that shared understanding of risk to, say, the marae or the hapu, or certain areas of relevance and priority. Oftentimes they start with doing a bit of a risk assessment. They know that they want to do adaptation planning, but they don't quite have a solid idea of what's at risk, or to what extent, you know, what's at risk, what sort of timeframes are we working with. So we kind of come in, build that understanding, and then move forward to start the adaptation planning. But I know that the Makatū community are presenting on their project at the Adaptation Futures Conference. So definitely attend that if anyone's going, because I think that'll be a really great discussion.
Kia ora. That was awesome. All right. Well, I'll leave you to it for a little minute or two.
Kia ora.
And Liana, thanks for jumping back in there. A question for Ruby. Kia ora, Ruby. Can you provide more detail on how Rangatane chose their experts?
Yeah, so I saw that one come up. So it was up to Rangitane as a runanga, so Te Runanga Rangitane o Waido, who they chose as experts, as they would know who had grown up along the bar, who might know certain things. And I think a lot of the times whānau came in and were like, oh, I don't know why I'm here, I don't know anything. And then they'd sit and chat to you for like a couple of hours and it was great. Yeah. So more up to the runanga than anything.
Right. Kia ora. Next one here, probably more for us, maybe. Has there been any research or incentives by the Coastal Society for Engineered or Scientific Studies planting in these sediment-prone coastal areas to mitigate the losses of coastlines? Probably can't speak to that too much, sorry, at this point. There hasn't been necessarily research by the Coastal Society as such, but certainly within their members, there are quite a lot of mitigated plantings, whether it's community-led and various members of the Coastal Society through consultancies or their council roles supporting large areas of plantings. I think Taiao, there was quite some significant plantings along the banks there, and it's definitely as part of the Coastal Society's, I guess, area of mahi that that plantings are quite an important aspect of sediment prone or sediment erosional areas as well. So yes, absolutely. And honestly, jump into the publications on the NZCS website. We put out a weekly digest and what is it called? Newsletter as well, which has great articles in it about all the sort of aspects as well. So please jump on there and have a look through the publications and they'll answer it a whole lot better than me, probably in this instance. Kia ora, Sarah. Mahi tika ana korua. Rangatira ake ne wene korere kato. So yeah, fantastic job. And I think that's echoed by quite a few people on here as well, which is fantastic. Anaru says, kia ora Ruby, how were some of the bar finds identified as hangi pits from the GPR data? Was it based on kōrero from whānau?
Yes, GPR is not my wheelhouse, but I can answer this one. So the ones that we know are hangi pits is because of previous archaeological surveys, so not in this project, but they've done, Rangitane have done quite a bit of work on the bar in terms of the archaeological side of things, so it's just lining up with what those surveys found and then with what the GPR results show.
Okay. Awesome. All right, thank you for that. Got a Rachel. She's saying, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, and this is a good question, on what might be some key challenges, shifts that are ahead for iwi and runanga as they manage changes on our coastlines and on our natural resources. Probably for either of you. Lucy, Ruby, do you have any initial thoughts on that?
I think it's different for locations, but I do think it's something that will come up in the later stages of this project in terms of having those hui with wider organisations and communities around Te Tauihu. What are the specific challenges that they are looking at for this location? Yeah, be interesting to find out. Have a kōrero.
Aki, have you got anything you'd like to add in that space, or?
Can you just read the question, sorry, Bryony?
Yeah, so it's just wondering if you have any thoughts on what might be some key challenges, shifts that are ahead for iwi and runanga as they manage changes on our coastlines and natural resources.
Yeah, I think it's the rate of change is going to be a challenge. So, we're trying to plan for adaptation. We're trying to mitigate as much as we can. However, the impact is still happening. So it's trying to like keep up with the constant change. I think that's going to be a huge challenge. We just have to look at Gabriel, right? And I know everyone talks about Gabriel, but it's a very good example of where the impact of extreme weather events caught up with us and we didn't have time to adapt and plan for the future. So I think that whole idea of trying to plan and adapt, but also trying to adapt as we speak is going to be the challenge that we face. How we kind of address that and approach that, I think there's room for discussion there, because extreme weather events are only going to continue to happen, and we need to kind of keep up with them as we continue to plan forward into the future. So yeah, that's what I think is the big challenge right now.
No, I think great answers. Thank you. Oh, kia ora. Debbie has got her question. Keen to understand how adaptation planning is paid for. How do whānau who contribute get remunerated? It's a good question. Does anyone know?
It's quite variable, to be honest. Like a lot of our projects, especially with hapu, have been funded by council. So I mentioned that seed fund. So it's a small pot of money in order to get the ball rolling in terms of planning for the hapu. However, in a lot of our mahi that Shara and I have been part of, yes, we are doing kind of consultancy, but we're also doing a lot of research as well. So we have access to different research funds that we're trying to cross leverage to enable hapu to be part of the process. But I think being strategic and spending money wisely is really important, but ensuring that hapu are supported, both in terms of having their time remunerated is a huge thing. So factoring that into your budgets when you are doing funding proposals and those sorts of things, ensuring koha is accounted for in your planning. That's just some of the examples that we've been doing. And I mean, we're still learning as well. We just, at the moment, funding's quite tight, funding's quite scarce. So we try to make use of every piece of funding that we have and cross leverage as much as we can in order to do that. But ensuring that hapu are remunerated for their time and koha and those sorts of things is really important. A really good thing as part of that seed funding is that it is community-led, so the community holds the purse strings. So then they're the ones who give the puti out to the consultants that go do this risk assessment, or they they hold the purse strings to give the hire for the marae and to pay for kai and those sorts of things. So that seed fund has been really integral, and I know other councils are taking it on board as well. I know Northland's got one. I think down south they've got another seed fund for adaptation by communities. So yeah, that's just some things from me.
Yeah, no, kia ora. That's we've probably got about 4 or 5 minutes left. So I'll just sort of go through some of these here. Sarah Piri just responded again saying here at FNDC. Sorry, I'm not sure what FNDC is. Maybe somebody else knows. We've just had our community adaptation program accepted. We have 3 PO approach to this. PO 1 community-led, PO 2 tangata whenua-led, PO 3 toolkits for communities outside of PO 1 and 2. So that's really helpful to know. Thank you for putting that in.
I think that's Far North District Council, I think they've just come up with a adaptation fund. So yeah, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, kia ora. We have in integrating Mātauranga Māori into climate adaptation research, what methodologies or frameworks do you consider most effective for ensuring epistemological, excuse my saying of that, equity between Indigenous knowledge systems and Western scientific approaches? Oh, any thoughts on that briefly?
Ruby, do you have anything?
Oh, those are some big words. I think focusing on approaches, I think just working in, hang on, let me just read the question. Benefits of Te Māori approaches. I think an approach is working in partnership and it being kind of a community focus. So the idea of like what benefits Māori benefits the community Aotearoa as a whole, it's quite community focused, which I think has a whole range of benefits that come with that. That's my brief input.
Yeah, and I'd feed off Ruby's kōrero around partnerships. I think partnerships are crucial for any sort of adaptation planning, particularly with hapu and iwi Māori. And I think something that we developed as part of my PhD was the wakahaurua framework to partnership. So building a wakahaurua with communities, using Indigenous knowledges, Western science in the process is going to be crucial. And I think another thing that's important as well is that there's a balance. Like sometimes hapu are like, yeah, let's use our mātauranga. We want it to be centered in our te ao Māori, our mātauranga. And then you go to another hapu and they're like, oh no, we really need some science here. We want some technical Western science advice to support us. So I think it's a balance, but having those partnerships, strong partnerships at the start, you'll be able to be flexible wherever the waka flows, right? If the waka flows and you need to do a risk assessment, only looking at sort of natural hazards data, then kei te pai, that's all good. And then the waka might go, okay, we want to try incorporate our mātauranga into this aspect now, and that's kei te pai. So I think it all comes back down to those strong partnerships that Ruby mentioned. Without those, it's really hard to do good adaptation. Yeah.
All right, I think I've got time for one more question. Apologies to anybody else that didn't get their questions answered. Rakesh just asked briefly, can you speak to the benefits of these Te ao Māori approaches in this work and shifting wider social perspectives on adaptation? How has it influenced neighbouring communities, both iwi and non-iwi, or how do you see the wider value? So I think just in terms of, you know, a bit of a momentum shift potentially, within both iwi, non-iwi communities, that it's happening across the board in 1 minute.
I was just rereading the question as well. I think shifting wider social perspectives on adaptation. And I think something that's coming to mind is just the history of it. So, you know, we have rich histories around adaptation. It's kind of like a tried and true part of our history, a part of our whakapapa, and kind of bringing that to light has been quite influential. I don't know how influential it's been to non-Māori communities because I haven't really done that, but maybe I should really think about that, because I think there's opportunity here for it to be applicable more widely. Definitely something to think about. But even more broadly, Indigenous communities have been adapting for centuries. There's a lot of mahi that's happening overseas with other Indigenous researchers and practitioners. The progression is happening, and I think it's really good. But I guess we also need to figure out ways that we can bring everyone on the waka as well, right? How do we bring every community that has to adapt on that waka? Keen to talk about it more because I think it's really important. Ruby, did you want anything to add? I think we've got a little bit of time, maybe.
Sorry, we probably have to, we'll have to close with a karakia, but I think it was a great way. Thank you to finish. Sorry, Ruby. Apologies. I'll pass to Shari. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Much appreciated. Thank you, Aku and Ruby.
Try and be quick. Kia ora. Kia whakaria te tapu, kia wā te ai te ara, kia tūriki whakataha ai, kia tūriki whakataha ai. Humie, huie, taiki e. Kia ora, everybody. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you.
Yummy.